All right, so we're up to the other topic, and this is from this book, Ill Winds by Larry Diamond, which is very interesting. We are living through a really spectacular event in the history of America and the history of the world. In the collapse of the American empire, we are living through a major step forward in switching from a democratic functioning government to some dictatorship or a failed state or something. And this is what happens in governance. And that's why I thought it was very appropriate for this class. This is governance. This is at the top level. You need governance for a democracy to succeed. And democracies are rare and fragile. They don't last long. Things that last a long time are like hereditary monarchies. Democracies tend to collapse. If you have too much corruption, where people don't do their job and you have to bribe people all the time, if you have presidents that abuse their power, and the government fails to take care of the people, then democracies fail. The government's job is to provide jobs, enough money so people can live, hold down the crime, provide electricity, water, roads, and schools. And if you don't meet those basic needs, then you collapse. And that's certainly where we are now. Now we have the kind of stuff that I never would have believed. We have a virus that's spreading, that's shutting down the business, so people have lost their jobs, and the government doesn't even provide them any money. They don't even open the schools. It's not even safe to go out, and they don't do anything. The Senate just takes off and goes on vacation and doesn't care. And it is spectacular. It's the kind of thing that I never thought could happen in America. You hear about it happening in other countries where the leaders just don't care at all. And it's similar to the end of Rome. The Roman Empire reached a point towards the end where leaders would just go off and indulge in play and their sick sexual fantasies while the nation just collapsed around them and they just didn't care. And we've gotten there very fast. So this is social capital. In order for a democracy to work, the whole point is the people should feel like they are part of the system and they should cooperate. You have to have sort of high morale. You have to have a culture where people trust one another and they trust the government. And now they're willing to obey the law, pay their taxes, participate in voting, respect leaders that get in, have arguments with people from other political parties and reach compromises. And this used to be the rule in Washington, that even though you would argue with people from the other party, you would not question their patriotism. You would say, we're all on the same team here, even if I disagree with you on some issue like abortion or something. So there is a measurement of corruption from in the next year. And this, by the way, is 2 years out of from 2018, the one I'm going to show you here. And I'm sure it has gotten much worse since then. But here, countries are rated by how free they are of corruption. And the worst countries in the world are countries like North Korea and Russia. You see them on the right here, where they are extremely corrupt. I mean, in North Korea, you've got a dictator who just kills his own people. He slaughters and poisons members of his own family. The news reports are all just lies. All the government proclamations are just lies. He claims to have magic powers and everything else. Russia is very similar, with Putin just having recently made himself king forever in Russia through amending the constitution. And he just poisoned another person this week who was a political opponent. He just kills people around him arbitrarily, and everyone lies. The doctors lied, the government lied. They said, oh, he wasn't poisoned. And then the United States is number 22, much less corrupt than Russia, but much more corrupt than nations like Denmark, New Zealand, Sweden, Norway, and so on. And the UK, better than the United States, but not the best. That's where we were in 2018. I would like to look this up again and see. I would imagine we have fallen much lower as the scandals of our current government have gotten much worse in the last 2 years. So there used to be something that America believed. America used to believe that democracy was a good thing and that we should help other nations become democracies. This was a foundational principle of American policy from World War II and moving forward. Ronald Reagan was a huge champion of it, convincing other nations to become democratic and supporting democracies in other countries because we saw democracy as a good thing and other nations should do it. Now we have completely abandoned that. and backed up and just let other countries fall, let Russia just invade their neighbors and do nothing about it. But this used to be a very common thing, and democracies were growing in the world. But democracies tend to fail, and here's the steps of how they fail. The first thing you do is demonize your political opponents. They're not just respectable people that disagree with me. They are monsters, satanic, evil, and should just be shot. You mess with the courts, so you no longer can get good verdicts in court. The judges are corrupt and bribed. You mess with the media so that the news is no longer reliable, and you can't believe anything you see on the TV or read in the newspaper. You get rid of things like public broadcasting, where you have an independent news source. You limit the internet for the same reason, so people can't go on the internet and find the truth. And then you mess with universities and think tanks, get the business community to be under the control of the autocrat instead of being independent. And then you get a class of crony capitalists, which are people who are working with the government, which is what we certainly have. This is what the huge tax bill last year was. This was Trump raiding the national treasury to give it to his crony friends, who would then donate some of it back to him, kickbacks. It was just looting the treasury and putting it in the pockets of people who were close to him. And one of the most spectacular occasions was when we had a need for personal protective equipment so doctors and nurses could treat people with coronavirus. And Trump said, I'm only going to give these materials to states that are grateful enough to me, where the governors are nice to me and say thank you and praise me. And governors who are unfriendly to me will not get this equipment, so their doctors can just die. And that is classic autocrat stuff. You're either in my club and I take care of you, or you're an opponent and I just get rid of you any way possible. And so we're watching all this happen. And now, of course, with removing the post office funding and cutting on the post office to stop mail-in voting, with Trump's constant claiming that the voting will be corrupt, and his recent claim that he deserves more than 2 more terms. He's been saying this off and on. He's saying it very loudly now. He has no intention of accepting the results of the election and no intention of accepting the term limits. He thinks he should just be a dictator forever like Putin, and the Republican voters and the Republican Senate and Republican Congress are all completely on board with this. Nobody says a word against it. So it is spectacular. When Nixon tried this in a much smaller way in the 70s, his Republican Party members stopped him. They met with him, dude, you have to resign. We can't have this kind of nonsense in America, because at that time there was a belief that America did not run this way. And that belief has vanished. The Republicans are completely happy to have this happen. It is very interesting. It is very surprising to me. And it is especially since people are so miserable. Now people are getting thrown out of their homes. They've lost their jobs. There are no jobs. And yet they're still not rebelling against the government. Somehow the power of Fox News and the alt-right propaganda is so powerful that it makes people participate and cheer for their own destruction. It is not what I expected. So here's some of the things just from a couple of years ago. Trump suggested that Hillary Clinton should be locked up. This was one of his famous chants, lock her up, lock her up. And then he said the Second Amendment people should just kill her to get rid of her. I'm very surprised we don't have political assassination more than we do in America. Putin just kills off his enemies, and so does Kim Jong-il. And Trump has always said these are his favorite people. He's in love with Kim Jong-un, whoever the new current one is. In North Korea, Putin is his best friend, and he trusts him, and those people run their government correctly. I'm surprised he hasn't started killing off his opponents physically. But anyway, this is a common Republican trope. Sarah Palin had a hit list of people that should be shot, and one of them did in fact get shot by her followers. They do. We need a Second Amendment solution to get rid of these people. This is the change that has happened. You know, back in 1994, you had the Democrats and the Republicans, and they were only a little bit different, and mostly they agreed on things, so you could have compromises in the middle on things. And now they've moved much further apart. As of 2014, they moved even further apart. You can see how it shifts. The bottom is 1980, and then by 2018, the right has moved more right and the left has moved more left to where there's almost no overlap anymore. And it doesn't seem to be possible to reach consensus on anything. So under Yeltsin, you had hyperinflation and a disastrous privatization scheme, right? Because Russia tried to use the American model and their government was so corrupt they couldn't do it. Everyone just stole the money at the top, so it failed. So Putin came in to make Russia great again by returning to the USSR, and he is very popular in Russia, and it is a kleptocracy. Putin steals the money at the top and puts it in his pocket to an incredible amount, although I think I've heard it called $100 billion is his personal wealth, and Trump has moved, I think, several $1 trillion into the pockets of his cronies with the tax cuts. So I think he might have exceeded the theft of Putin by now. But in 2018, it was the case that Putin had stolen more than Trump. But this is when your leaders are thieves and they're just stealing the money, which is a very common thing in the world, but it used to not be true of America. And China is also an enemy trying to undermine our system, but they're mostly just trying to steal our intellectual property to benefit their people. Anyway, Beijing wants to perform globalization, and China is doing what America used to. America used to have a government we were proud of, and we tried to make other people like us. We tried to export democracy and make other countries more democratic. Now, we don't do that anymore, quite the opposite. China believes that their system, which is more autocratic, is the right system, and they are vigorously trying to expand it. And they're doing it essentially unopposed now, because the only person that opposed them significantly was the United States, and we have just quit doing that. So China is expanding their system. And when I traveled to Sri Lanka a year or two ago, the people there said, well, in our opinion, China is far more important than the United States. They already rule the world, and you're like second power, which I think nobody would really dispute that anymore. So that's the point. The United States withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord. Trump wants to end NATO, which has been a long Russian goal. I mean, we're just removing ourselves from the world stage, which is what China did in the days of Mao Zedong, when you just go home and close the borders and hide and let the rest of the world burn. That's what we're doing now. And all right, so this is a kleptocracy where the leaders just steal money from the people, and it's quite impressive. 50% of Russian wealth is held in secret out offshore accounts, and in America, it was only 2% being stolen, although I'm sure this number has gone up greatly in the last couple of years. So that's the point. Democracy is generally considered to be a good idea by political scientists and by most Americans until perhaps 10 years ago. We believed that democracy was a good thing, that freedom that the type we had here was a wonderful thing, and other nations should have it. And we used soft power to do this. The fact that we were proud of ourselves and people here had a good life is something that other people would look up to, and they still do to some extent, because there are portions of our society that have not yet switched to the new paradigm of totalitarian rule. And as I say, it's a possibility that if we do not re-elect Trump, that some of this might be reversed gradually, although an awful lot of it is really long-term permanent damage. But I think it's widely believed that if we have another 4 years of Trump, we will in fact never get rid of him. He will be a dictator by the end of those 4 years, and there'll be nothing much left of the American democratic experiment. And we're going to see what happens. We are living through exciting times. And I mentioned it before, I'm increasingly thinking that it is immoral of me to continue to live in America. I think if Trump wins another 4 years, I will feel compelled to leave, because being here is just like throwing your life away to hand it to someone who doesn't value us at all, who just sees us as chess pieces to throw away for his entertainment. And I don't really think it's right to just let somebody slaughter you for no reason. But we'll see. It's possible that we can start turning this around. Anyway. So I'm going to stop that recording. And